In the last episode, we talked about how Queen Aethelflaed defeated the Vikings at Chester and how Northumbrians decided to retaliate against the Anglo-Saxons invading their land to retrieve their king's relics. And they met the Anglo-Saxons for an epic battle near Tettenhall. The entire Viking force leadership was slaughtered in the ensuing bloodbath, wreaking Jorvik for years to come and achieving a decisive triumph. In many ways, Tettenhall marked a turning point. Around this time, Ethelred finally died. Surprisingly, even though she was a woman in a militaristic male-dominated society, Ethelflaed was chosen to succeed him and assume the title of Lady of the Mercians. She was also compelled to cede sovereignty of London to Wessex, despite being unable to debate with her younger brother, portent of what would happen nearly 10 years later. Although Ethelflaed would maintain her position of power, Mercia's independence was in danger, because she had no male heir. For the following 8 years, Ethelflaed diligently devoted her time to erecting burghs, not only against the Welsh kingdoms to the west, where the sons of Rhodri, who had partnered with their father, had grown old, posing a threat to future instability, but also along the frontier with the 5 boroughs to the east. During this period, the 5 boroughs of East Mercia were engaged in a state of continual conflict. The sporadic raids into western Mercia were reported from the towns of Leicester and Bedford. Meanwhile, Edward was finally prepared to attack the Vikings on his borders. Between 911 and 913, he advanced his men into the town of Malden by land and by the sea in an effort to fully establish West Saxon rule over the region. Wessex was expanding for the first time since the Northmen arrived, and he now had a base from which he could assault his intended target, East Anglia. But in 914, whatever assault that Edward or Ethelflaed might have planned to launch were abruptly halted. Massive Viking forces had just destroyed the entire region of Brittany across the Channel, putting an end to its royal dynasty. Now, under the command of 2 warlords by the name of Rold and Otter, they crossed the Channel to Britain to try their luck once more. They attempted to surprise the Mercians by sailing up to Bristol, Channel, and into the River Severn, but once again, Ethelflaed was prepared for them, driving the Vikings out of Mercia and into Wales and murdering several in the process. Alfred's offspring were now skilled Viking warriors. They were even more brutal than he ever was, because they knew that even the slightest sign of weakness would result in a catastrophe. With his remaining ship, Edward chased Otter to an island near Cardiff, where he blockaded them for several weeks. Otter eventually gave up on England and moved to Ireland across the water. The scene was now prepared for the war's decisive conflict. By 916, Edward was back at Malden, where he continued to make preparations for conflict. By 914, Edward too was making inroads into the 5 boroughs, forcing the submission of some but not all of the Vikings of Bedford and Northampton. The sons of Rhodri, who had linked themselves to Alfred, had finally passed away, leaving their successors who were unproven as potential threats, forcing Ethelflaed to launch a foray into Wales in 916. By 917, Edward and Ethelflaed were both prepared to launch the last attack against the Danelaw. When the East Anglians finally made a move, a sizable force of Danes from the southernmost of the 5 boroughs aligned themselves with them. At Temford in Bedfordshire, they constructed their own borough in an effort to replicate the success of the Saxons. However, in a few weeks, Edward's armies attacked the castle, killed the East Anglian king, and then advanced to seize all of East Anglia and southeastern Mercia. As if the decisive victory over the Danes weren't enough, Ethelflaed was also on the move in the middle of 917. She immediately marched her now elite army across the border in the direction of Derby Borough, where they besieged the town. The town and sizable portion of eastern Mercia were destroyed after a bloody conflict, in which several of her top Danes were murdered. Leicester was the second borough to submit by 918, followed quickly by the 3 other boroughs of Stamford, Nottingham and Lincoln. Mercia had finally finished its conquest under Ethelflaed, and it now had approximately the same borders as it had before the arrival of the Vikings. Amazingly, she continued after that. By the middle of 918, the Vikings of Jorvik had agreed to submit to Ethelflaed in exchange for assistance in fending off an upsurge in Viking power in Dublin that now threatens to annex Northumbria. In the end, the transaction never happened. The same year, Ethelflaed passed away, leaving only her daughter Elfwin to carry on her mother's legacy. By 918, the Anglo-Saxons controlled the entirety of England south of the Humber. All that was left for Edward to do was to march north to Tamworth, capture Elfwin, imprison her for the rest of her days in a monastery, and ultimately unite Mercia with its ever-expanding realm. This was a pretty simple process for the little-known Elfwin. Living in a strongly dominated community, Edward then appears to have won the fealty of the 5 Welsh kingdoms, much like Alfred did before him. Thus, for the first time in history, the majority of the regions south of the Humber were united. Northumbria's kingdom was all that was left at this point. However, as Edward was adding Mercia to his ever-expanding kingdom, the Dublin Norse, a lightning attack by members of Ireland's Ever dynasty, which would soon be dreaded, conquered Jorvik. England had been made, but it could simply be destroyed once more. In the midst of the Viking invasion, Alfred of Wessex first envisioned and established the idea of a unified Angleland, or England, made up of all the domains of the old Anglo-Saxon kings. But the reconquest of his children Edward and Aethelflaed turned it into a reality. But it was his great-grandson Aethelstan who developed the concept further by temporarily ruling over all of the other kingdoms in Britain, creating the first English empire. Nevertheless, Aethelstan's succession had been contested, just as that of his father before him. He ascended to the throne amid dynastic strife that many people believed to be fraudulent, and it appeared as though the kingdom would be destroyed before it had even begun. However, he concluded his reign as the first and one of the greatest English kings in history, having defeated one of the largest Viking invading fleets ever gathered and triumphed over every other kingdom of Britain. Aethelstan was born in 894 during the reign of his grandpa Alfred, who is rumored to have taken a shine to the youngster and may have given him the go-ahead to succeed after his son Edward. However, the West Saxon political elite would ultimately have different plans. Aethelstan's mother, who the records refer to as a simple concubine, passed away soon after his birth, and Edward remarried, resulting in the birth of almost 14 additional children by 2 additional spouses, pushing Aethelstan further down the line of succession. Aethelstan was a skilled fighter in his mid-20s. By 918, after fighting in numerous campaigns alongside his aunt Aethelflaed to win back the 5 boroughs of the Danelaw from Mercia, Edward travelled north to assert direct rule over Mercia for the first time after Aethelflaed died that summer. Albeit she had no male heir to succeed her, this extended West Saxon dominance over all areas south of the Humber where English was spoken. Edward put a lot of effort into establishing his new dominion over the following 6 years, occasionally making dubious claims of dominance over the Vikings of Northumbria and the 5 Welsh kingdoms. But soon before he passed away in 924, everything started to go awry. While to the north, King Sihtric of Jorvik appears to have used the occasion to expand his dominance into the 5 boroughs, the Mercians appear to have rebelled against West Saxon rule. Only a few weeks later, his son and successor Alfred passed away. Aethelstan, a war veteran and experienced ruler who was already 30 years old, was chosen as their king by the West Saxons, rather than submitting to their clemency and nobility. Conflict between West Saxon political elite and that of Mercia lasted for about a year, threatening to split the Anglo-Saxon and Mercia state again in 2 sections. In the meantime, Sihtric took use of the chance to further extend his power in the south. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll talk about King Aethelstan's attempt to reunite England, Scotland and Wales, and the great war that formed the United Kingdoms we know today. But until then, stay safe and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the second part.